everyone, we're back with part 2 of our day 1 of free agency recap. In today's video, we're looking at the Atlantic Division. A lot of movement here from the Atlantic Division as there were a lot of signings made on July 1, and we'll touch on all of them and how they affected the Atlantic Division going forward, coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So in today's video, we've got part 2 of our July 1st recap videos. In our last video, we looked at the Central Division, all the signings that the Central Division teams made on July 1st. In today's video, we're looking at the Atlantic Division, all the signings that the Atlantic Division teams made on July 1st, and seeing how it sort of affected the rankings of the Atlantic Division, who maybe won and lost July 1st after some of these movements. So we'll see some of these very interesting signings here. So as usual, we'll start with the top team, that's Boston. The Bruins wound up making 7 signings July 1st, which is more than any of the other Central Division teams made. The Bruins signed Tanner Jeannot to a 5-year, $3.4 million deal. The Bruins signed Sean Kuraly to a 2-year, $1.85 million deal. Kuraly and Eyssimont to a 2-year, $1.45 million deal. Blumel to 1-year, $875,000. Steves to 1-year, $850,000. Harris to 1 year at $825,000. And Tuft 1 year, $775,000. So Tuft was in the Bruins organization last year, worked out as like a solid call-up option, mostly an AHL player, expecting to be the same thing this year. So the Bruins retain a little bit of their forward depth from last year. They signed Jordan Harris to a 1 year, $825,000 deal. The former Canadian, who was not qualified by the Blue Jackets, wound up hitting free agency as a UFA and winds up signing with the Boston Bruins. The Bruins do need some more help on the blue line, and I think Harris could provide that in a third pair role, so a solid move there from the Bruins to get Harris, who used to be in Columbus. Then they signed Steves, they signed Blumel. Both of these guys are more AHL players. They were last year with Dallas and Toronto, but I do think they have the potential to be either call-up options or guys who can play potentially fourth line minutes. So some add forward depth there is they did get Blumel and Steves. They also get Kuraly and Eyssimont, 2 years of 1.45, and Sean Kuraly at 2 years of 1.85. Both are really solid fourth liners. I mean, Eyssimont was over the past couple of seasons in Tampa and when he was acquired by Seattle at the deadline. And Kuraly has been a solid bottom 6 forward for the Blue Jackets for the past couple of years after signing with them a few years ago from Boston. So Kuraly is going to reunite with the Boston Bruins. Eyssimont going to join them. Eyssimont going to be a solid fourth line winger. Kuraly a solid fourth line center. For what some of these other teams paid for fourth line centers, Kuraly seems like a steal at this point, even though he's up there in age. And the Eyssimont deal, I think, is a beautiful piece of work there from the Bruins. And then they got to the real head-scratching one. Tanner Jeannot, they signed to a 5-year deal at a $3.4 million AAV. That's a little bit of a head-scratcher to me. Jeannot is a good player, do not get me wrong, but I can't see paying him $3.5 million for 5 years. He had one really good season back in his rookie year with Nashville. After that, he hasn't really been a whole bunch. Is he the prototypical Boston type player who's going to lay the body and things like that? Yes, but at the best, he's a third line forward. At best, and I don't think you're paying $3.5 million to third line forwards. So could this deal work out for the Bruins? Maybe, but in my opinion, at least the initial thought, I don't think that was a smart move there from the Bruins to give him 5 years at $3.5 million. So a very interesting signing spree there from Boston. Then we go to the Buffalo Sabres. They made 10 July 1st signings. They were quite busy. They signed a couple of low-end prospects to new deals. That's Shells and Mesta. Mesta gets a 1 year, $775,000 deal. Shells 2 years at $865,000. Not too bad of signings there for the Buffalo Sabres to get some young prospects. They signed Carson Mayer and Mason Gertson to 2-year deals at $775,000. Both are AHL level guys who have had stints at the NHL level, and I could see be call-up options if they ran into some injuries. They signed Tyson Kozak and Ryan Johnson, 2 of their own players who are RFAs, to 3-year extensions of $775,000. Smart piece of business there. there. I think long-term Johnson could be a third pair defenseman, Kozak a fourth line forward. So to get them for long-term at 3 years, only league minimum, is pretty good work there for the Buffalo Sabres. They signed Zach Jones, who didn't get a qualifying offer from the Rangers, to a 1-year deal, $900,000. They needed some more added defensive depth. Jones can be a 6'7" guy, which is something I think the Buffalo Sabres were missing. So it's a really solid move there. They get Alex Lyon, 2 years of $1.5 million AAV. I do really wonder where the Buffalo Sabres goaltending is going, because they have Luukkonen, they have Levi. Lyons can be a decent backup. I wonder if he could be a third stringer for that team. $1.5 million AAV. I'm not sure if any teams would acquire that from waivers if it was to be placed on there. So it's an interesting but a tiny bit of a confusing sign there from the Sabres as they get a backup goaltender. They also signed Justin Danforth, 2 years, $1.8 million. Solid penalty killer, solid fourth line guy. Did really good over the past couple seasons in Columbus. I think he could be a very solid fourth line installment for the Buffalo Sabres from Columbus. So that's, I think, a really solid steal of a deal for the Sabres. And then they signed Ryan McLeod, who actually had a solid season last year. I think he had 50 plus points in Buffalo. Really solid year. He was an RFA. The Sabres extended him 4 years, $5 million AAV. A very interesting extension there. Is McLeod a $5 million player? I'm not sure. If it was closer to the $4 million AAV place, I would have said it would probably have been a good deal. This might be a little bit of a stretch to be a good deal. I think at best McLeod's a third line center. Do you pay third line centers $5 million? I don't really think so. So an interesting signing spree there from Buffalo. They had a couple of really solid moves, but also some confusing ones. Then we saw the Detroit Red Wings make 4 day one signings. They signed James Van Riemsdyk to a 1-year, $1 million deal. Jacob Bernard Docker to a 1-year deal, $875,000. And then they signed Ian Mitchell and John Leonard to 1-year deals at league minimum. So Mitchell is a solid depth defenseman. I think he could easily be a solid 6'7" guy in Detroit. Leonard is definitely an AHL player, but has had some time at the NHL level. So I could see both these guys start the season as AHLers and potentially be call-ups. They get Jacob Bernard Docker, right shot defenseman, wasn't qualified by Buffalo. This is a steal of a deal, 1 year, $875,000, under $1 million for a solid third pair defenseman who has the potential to still be a solid second pair defenseman, is I think a really good signing here from the Wings. And they also signed Van Riemsdyk, 1 year, $1 million, solid guy who can play third line minutes to put up some pucks into the net. I think that's also a really solid move there. So Red Wings make a couple of really solid moves as they make 4 signings on July 1st. The Florida Panthers made 6 signings July 1st. They signed Tomas Nosek, who was in the bottom 6 for them last year. Jack Stanichka, who's more of an AHL guy but can be a call-up option. Brandon Bussi, who's a solid third-string goaltender. And Nolan Foote, who's more of an AHL guy but has over the past couple of years gotten more and more stints at the NHL level. All to 1 year league minimum deals. So I think Foote and Nosek could both be solid bottom 6 forwards next year. Stanichka should be an AHL player who could be a call-up option. And Bussi could be a solid third stringer for the Florida Panthers and be called upon if either Bobrovsky or Tarasov run into injuries. Speaking of Tarasov, the Florida Panthers signed Tarasov to a 1 year, $1.05 million extension. Not a bad deal there. If it works out and Tarasov's a good backup, they could always extend him. If it doesn't, they can walk away from him next year. So a very solid move there from Florida to sign one of their RFAs in Tarasov. And they also signed prospect Garcia Muke to a 2-year, $875,000 AAV deal. So just a young prospect who gets a 2-way deal from the Florida Panthers. So some very interesting signings. We don't think any of them were really bad for the Florida Panthers. Then we saw the Montreal Canadiens make 4 day one free agency signings. That was Kaapo Kahkonen, Sammy Blais, Nathan Clermont, and Alex Belzile. Belzile, Clermont, and Blais all got 1 year league minimum deals. Belzile has been in the Montreal Canadiens organization before. Solid AHL or call-up option, probably will be that in Montreal. Clermont's more of an AHL guy. Would expect him to be that this year for the Habs. Blais has had some time at the AHL level. Last year spent the entirety of the AHL level. I could definitely see him challenge for a bottom 6 role in Montreal. Would not be one bit surprised if he was an AHL guy, call-up option, or a healthy scratch. And they also signed Kaapo Kahkonen, 1 year, $1.15 million deal. So Kahkonen, I think, could easily be the backup goaltender for Montreal to Montembeault if Dobes doesn't look good at the very start of the season, or if Dobes is looking really good at the backup, they could place Kahkonen on waivers and have him as the third stringer. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But 4 pretty dang good signings there for Montreal on day one. The Ottawa Senators made 3 day one signings in free agency, signing Lars Eller to a 1 year, $1.25 million AAV deal. Lykesell and Bongiovanni to 1 year league minimum deals. Lykesell and Bongiovanni are AHL players, so not too surprising there. And those guys will most most likely spend most of the season next year in the AHL level. While Eller's a solid fourth line center, I think on the Senators team that already has a top 3 in the center group that are stellar, you add Eller as your fourth line center, that's really sort of rounding out the center group. And I think at 1.25 for what some of the other teams were paying fourth line centers, that's a steal and a half for the Ottawa Senators. So not much movement from Ottawa, but they do sign Lars Eller. Then we saw 4 day 1 signings from Tampa Bay, as they signed Holmberg to a 2-year, $1.55 million AAV deal, Gage Goncalves to a 1-year, $1.2 million extension, and then they also signed Simon Lundmark, 2 years at league minimum, and Nick Abruzzese, 1 year at league minimum. So a very interesting note there. Abruzzese, Lundmark were both AHLers for Toronto and Winnipeg respectively last year. I think Abruzzese has the potential to be a solid bottom 6 guy. Lundmark's probably going to be an AHL player and a call-up option, but I could see Abruzzese get some stints at the NHL level. They re-signed Goncalves, who had a really solid season last year in Tampa, so the RFA gets a 1-year extension to see how well he will do this year in a bottom 6 role with the Bolts. And they also get Holmberg, the former Maple Leaf who was not qualified, 2-year deal, $1.55 million AAV deal, a steal of a deal in my opinion for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Holmberg should be a very solid bottom 6 player, very versatile guy, can play center, can play wing, solid move there from the Bolts to add some forward depth with Holmberg. So some very interesting note there, but the Bolts make some really solid value adds. And then we saw the Toronto Maple Leafs signed Dakota Mermis and Benoit Olivier Giroux to 2-year, $813,000 AAV deals, Pezzetta to a 2-year, $788,000 deal, and then Boyd and Lettieri to 1-year league minimum deals. Most of these guys are AHL players who can play the NHL level. Giroux, Boyd, Lettieri have all gone stints in the NHL level over the past year or two, but have mostly been AHL players. I expect that to be the same in Toronto. Probably AHL players who could be called up if they were into some injuries. They also get Mermis, who spent some time last year in Toronto. He can be a solid 7-8 defenseman, probably start at the AHL level, but could be a call-up option. Could be a healthy scratch for the Leafs, so that's a really solid deal there for the Leafs. And they also get Michael Pezzetta, who I think is going to be a solid bottom 6 forward, hard-hitting fourth line guy, and I do think it's going to be a stellar addition there for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So very interesting note there, but the Maple Leafs made 5 day 1 signings in free agency. So definitely lots of very intriguing signings from day 1 of free agency. I do think that the Leafs, I was expecting them to do a little bit more, but they've got some solid depth. The Bolts, I think, actually did quite well with the limited cap space they have, especially with the Holmberg signing. Since they didn't have too much cap space either, I think the Eller signing was a pretty good piece of work. Montreal just got some added depth, especially the backup goalie in Kahkonen. Florida just adds some of their own players back. They get a guy like Bussi, Foote, who I think should provide some added depth. Red Wings made some very solid moves, including adding JVR and JBD. Buffalo, they made some questionable moves with the McLeod extension, with Lyon being signed, but I do think they made some really smart moves there too, like with Danforth and with Zach Jones. And I think Boston, all in all, made a whole bunch of really solid moves, except for the Tanner Jeannot one. So I'm not exactly sure who's the winner and loser. I think we're going to have to wait a few days to figure out exactly who is the winner and loser in the Atlantic, but I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Which team won and lost day 1 of free agency at this point in time? I think my best guess would be like maybe Detroit and Buffalo with the amount of signings and solid value adds. I think those would probably won day 1 for the Atlantic, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. That is all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're related to me, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so I'm going to check that out. It'll be inside the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.